David J. Maloney. This week, David talks with legendary singer, songwriter, and producer Al Kooper. And now, here's your host, David J. Maloney.
Welcome to everyone at home, and I would normally say our studio audience to the weekly show. I'm your host, David J. Maloney. I say normally, as we'd usually shoot the show before a small studio audience at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. But as you can see, we are still in the last few weeks of shooting from home due to coronavirus concerns. We should be back to shooting live-to-tape shows in the studio fairly soon. Tonight, I'm going to skip my weekly monologue and go straight to introducing our featured guest, because frankly, his career has been so storied and extensive that his introduction leaves no time for jokes. Tonight's guest is a legendary singer, songwriter, producer, and musician. He's worked and performed with so many incredible artists, including Bob Dylan, the Rolling Stones, George Harrison, The Who, Jimi Hendrix, Alex Cooper, and Cream, just to name a few. He played the iconic organ track on Bob Dylan's Like a Rolling Stone. He later essentially created the jazz pop genre as the organizer and initial lead singer for Blood, Sweat, and Tears. After that, he discovered Leonard Skinner and produced their first 3 albums, which included the songs Sweet Home Alabama and Freebird. He subsequently performed and arranged tracks on 3 George Harrison songs, including All Those Years Ago, playing with George Harrison. He's produced records for or played with B.B. King, The Tubes, and numerous others. Some have referred to him as the Forrest Gump of rock because of how many legendary rock songs he's had some sort of influence on. I kind of see him as the Kevin Bacon of modern music, as there is likely fewer than 7 degrees of separation between him and almost every major event in music in the last 50 years. I am so very excited to say that we have the incomparable Al Kooper on the show with us tonight, so don't go anywhere, and we will be right back. And we are back. Tonight's featured guest is a legendary singer, songwriter, composer, producer, and musician. If musicians had resumes, his would be one of the longest and most eclectic, spanning roughly 63 years and including songwriting, production work, or playing with artists from Gary Lee Lewis and the Playboys to Bob Dylan, to his own super session work with Mike Bloomfield and Stephen Stills, as well as with Blood, Sweat, and Tears, Leonard Skinner, The Tubes, Jimi Hendrix, members of the Beatles, and the list goes on and on. He currently hosts Coopercast on Podchaser and other formats. I'm so very pleased to introduce the legendary Al Kooper to the show. Al, welcome.
Hello there.
You are one of the most storied musicians out there, but a lot of people don't know your early story. When did the music bug first hit you?
When I was 6, my parents took me to one of their friends' houses as opposed to getting a babysitter. And they had a piano there. And I thought, well, I never have tried to do this. And so I sat at the piano, and fortunately, I was out of earshot of the rest of them. And by the end of their visit, I had figured out how to play the #1 song, which was Tennessee Waltz.
I've read when you entered junior high, your music world kind of changed. From what I understand, you had made some new friends at a new school, and they introduced you to some new music. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
When I had to go from 6th grade to 7th grade, I had to change schools. And the school was in a less savory neighborhood. And so I had to take a bus every day, and I had to deal with new people that I'd never come across before. And first I was a little uptight, but then I saw that everybody was the same, basically. And so I heard new music. I met new people. And my life changed.
Is it true those friends snuck you into their church so you could hear the music? And was that your first introduction to gospel?
No. would hear gospel music on the radio. At my house with my parents, at first I used to hide a flashlight and a book under my bed because I wouldn't sleep much. And I'd wake up and I'd take the flashlight and I'd read the book. Then my father got one of those battery-operated radios that had an earphone jack, but it was only one ear, and and mono. But by that time, I was really into music, and so I stayed up all night and I listened to bizarre stations, and I started to get into R&B music.
Your teen years, how much did your parents really know about your music life and your early successes? Because I've read about a little bit of that, but I didn't want to go too much off on a tangent.
Well, not much, because I would go to New York whenever I could from Queens, which was like a 45-minute subway ride. And I started getting into the music business. But when I was 14, I got offered a chance to play with a really big group.
Was that the Royal Teens?
Yes.
So Short Shorts hits #1. What was it like being that young and in a band with a #1 hit at that time?
Well, it was, fantastic. It was really fun, but we didn't get to do that much. And then we played like a 10-day show in New York with like 40 acts on it. And we'd go out and play. Everybody would play 2 or 3 songs, and that was when I really got addicted, because I met all these other people.
Did you even try to juggle school and music, or did music always win?
No, I tried. I actually went to college for a year and a half to study music.
At that time, was there anyone you looked up to musically or wanted to be like?
Well, I had friends that were good musicians, and of course I started in a neighborhood band, and we'd play churches and schools and stuff like that, and private parties and like that, and we were called the Aristocats.
So how did you come to meet Irwin Levine and Bob Brass?
Well, I went to a publisher, and they were interested in signing me, but they wanted to see if I could work with these 2 other writers that they had. And they just wrote words, the 2 guys, Brass and Irwin Levine. And we were all Jewish, which was a great coincidence. And so he hooked me up with them, and we started writing together, and it worked. And so, we'd come to work every day, and we'd write songs, and people would record them, and nothing much happened till This Diamond Ring.
So the 3 of you shared credits with This Diamond Ring and a few others. Is there a memory or story that sticks out to you about that time in particular?
We left that company that put us together after about a year, and we went to this other guy who I knew, whose name was Aaron Schroeder, and he had just bought all of Dick Clark's companies.
Oh, wow.
Because Dick Clark had to divest himself of those, because otherwise he was going to prison. So it was a quick transition. And so he had all these songs and this giant catalog of hit songs and everything. And it changed everything because we could reach more people now. And so we left the other place and went to Aaron, who I was with originally before I met the two guys. And so the three of us started writing for this company called January Music. And and we had the first record I ever had as a writer was called My Kind of Love by a guy named Anastasia on Laurie Records. That was my first thing. I was very thrilled to see my name on a record.
So you're young, you're meeting all these musicians and industry people, and at some point you befriend Tom Wilson, who invites you to the studio the very day Bob Dylan was recording Like a Rolling Stone. Now, I'm not going to ask you to repeat how you came to playing the now famous organ riffs on that song, because I know you're tired of telling the story. And I would invite those who are watching the show to get Al's autobiography, which we'll talk about a little bit later in the show, as it really is a fantastic, this whole thing about the Bob Dylan thing is a fantastic story of determination combined with talent, and probably more talent than I think you give yourself credit for, and maybe a little opportunism. But I do want to ask you though, Al, was that kind of a Back to the Future butterfly effect moment? Like if that moment doesn't happen the way that it did, does your career, relationships, friendships, maybe even life take a different path?
Well, I was very good friends with Tom Wilson, and it never we never discussed Bob Dylan especially, but I mean he would take me to New York Giant football games, and we had fourth row seats on the 30-yard line. And I liked this, but I really liked him. He was a great guy, and I spent a lot of time in his office, and that's why I ended up being invited to the Dylan session as a spectator, not as a player. And then what happened, and that really changed my life. And at the end of the Like a Rolling Stone session, everybody left, and it was just me and Bloomfield and Bob, and we were very comfortable together, which I was very surprised about.
So that moment kind of thrust you into being a bit of an in-demand organ player, and you later
not till that record came out.
Yeah, because then when it hits, everybody kind of wants that sound, right? Because it became kind of a popular sound. Is that kind of how that ended up occurring?
Well, for some reason, which I still don't understand to this day, people thought I was a great organ player and wanted to hire me for sessions. I think it was more because that I was playing with Bob, and more than what I was playing, because it was sort of early in my career, although I had played on sessions before as a keyboard player. But I was, until that day, concentrating on my guitar playing. And then the organ thing, happened, and I said, so I'll play the organ. And I had to, learn a lot more about the organ in order to do that.
And you later get called upon to work with, I guess, The Who, the Rolling Stones, George Harrison, a bunch of others. And you play on Electric Ladyland with Jimi Hendrix, but he was already a friend of yours by that time, right?
Well, I wouldn't say a friend, but we knew each other. We met at Monterey Pop, where I was a stage manager. And the Blues Project was there playing, without me, because I had left the Blues Project. And so it was, that was a big experience.
So tell me about your first jam session with Jimmy. How did that happen?
Well, he invited me to the studio to play. So I went and I got there early, and I came in. There were a bunch of guitars all set up, black Stratocasters. He always played the same guitar. For those who don't know what a black Stratocaster is, it's what he was playing at Monterey and what he was playing that day. But there were about 4 of them on stands. And I knew that they were strung upside down so that he could play them, Mr. Lefty.
Yeah.
And so I picked one up, and I couldn't really play it. It was too stupid. And just at that moment, he walked in, and he said, "Hi," he said, "you like that guitar?" I said, "I don't know. Somebody's got it strung all screwed up, and I can't play it." He said, "Well, why don't you keep it?" I said, "Because it's yours." And I said, "Don't be ridiculous." And we went and played the session. And the next day, his roadie brought it to my house.
Oh, wow.
And I said, "I can't turn this down." And I had it for quite a while. And I moved a lot, in the course of my career. I moved to different cities. And my house always got broken into.
Oh, geez.
Because people knew that I had that. And I kept it under my bed. And no one ever found it. I mean, my house got robbed at least 6 times.
Oh, geez.
And nobody ever looked there. So it was a great hiding place. And a few years ago, I sold it because I was tired of people breaking into my house.
So is there any special moment or maybe conversation that you had with Jimmy?
The best thing is that we lived half a block from each other. So we saw each other all the time. And in clubs and restaurants, walking down the street, buying the newspaper, we always saw each other. So we got to play together a lot.
So you also played horn and piano on You Can't Always Get What You Want. Were those parts pre-written, improvised, a little of both?
No, always improvised. I mean, I think that's why people hired me, because they never put music in front of me or told me what to play. Even the Rolling Stones.
That's cool.
And by the time they called me, I understood this. I knew what I had to do when I went to the studio, and that's what I would do, and it usually worked. To the client's satisfaction, and then sometimes to the chart's satisfaction. So they called me, and I'd never been to England, so I thought, well, I got to do this, the Rolling Stones. I mean, what's next? The Beatles? And so I went, but I went 5 days early. And in the 5 days, I bought records and clothes. I I bought about 40 albums and a lot of clothes. And as a matter of fact, at one of the clothing stores, I bumped into Brian Jones.
Oh, wow.
And he said, "Oh, you're going to come play with us?" And I said, "You bet, I'll be there." And so that was that. It was like most other sessions, except it was the Rolling Stones. And everybody was really nice to me. And and I asked if I could, after we got the take of the song, I asked if I could put piano on it, and they let me do that. And everybody was happy. And then they put, then when I got back to New York, I said, boy, it would be great to put a French horn on the intro. And I had a part in my head. So I still played French horn from when I was in college. And so I rented a French horn. And the hardest part was sneaking the tapes into Columbia Records. Because at this time, when I got back from England, I was working as a full-time record producer at Columbia Records. And Columbia Records had its own studios all over the place, all over the country. So you couldn't just walk in with a tape box. So I worked out a way that I could walk in with a tape box, but then the hardest part was walking out with a tape box.
Speaking of the Beatles, at some point you get the call to work with George Harrison. How does that call go?
And I got a call asking if I was interested in doing that. What a foolish call. And so I drove with this other guy, and we got there, and it was pouring out. It was just coming down as bad as it can come down. And we got there, and when we pulled up to the house, there were at least 100 newspaper people lined up there. Because this was the day after John Lennon got shot.
Oh, geez.
So we had to get through those people to get in, and the caretaker got us in.
Had you known when you were pulling up that day that had already happened? Had the news already gotten to you by that point?
Yeah, I'm a night owl. I only sleep like 2 to 4 hours a night. This from my childhood. And so I heard it all on the TV mostly, and so I knew what was going on. And Ringo was there as well. Ringo was on the session, so you had half the Beatles there. So it was pretty somber at first, and then very slowly we started playing music, and then it was sort of a good cure-all.
That is our show for tonight. Thank you so much for watching. A very special thanks to Al Kooper for joining us. He's going to be back with us again next week to finish our interview, so please tune back in, same time, same channel.